trade for Ehire Adrianza, trade for Jake Odorizzi and Robbie Grossman, and sign Austin Riley to a 10-year deal. Braves GM Alex Anthopoulos was a busy, busy man, and he may not be finished ahead of the trade deadline. This is Battery Power TV. Cory McCartney, along with Grant McAuley. We dove into the Riley deal in another episode, and I encourage everyone to go back and check that out. The Braves had some needs, though, Grant. Outfield, infield depth, rotation, bullpen. A lot of those got checked off in a flurry of moves on Monday.
Yeah, they did. I guess we can call this our Tuesday morning edition of Alex Anthopoulos' big day off, because he did not take a day off. He was extremely busy. He locked up a cornerstone piece in Austin Riley for the next decade. Then he went out and on his checklist, he just went through what the Braves' needs were. You laid them out. They needed some infield versatility. They got that with Adrianza coming over. The Robinson Cano experiment is now over, and a familiar face from the 2021 World Series is back. Then you go out and you get somebody like Robbie Grossman, who I think can positively affect the Braves' outfield mix. I know they have a whole bunch of outfielders. This guy wears out left-handed pitching, though, a nearly 1,000 OPS against him in about 100 plate appearances. That's something that they need after losing Adam Duvall. And then, of course, you wondered, can you bolster the rotation? Is there anything to do with the pitching staff, or that you can do for the pitching staff to make it a little bit better, a little bit deeper? Well, we got our answer. Will Smith for Jake Odorizzi. That's an interesting trade. I'm sure that's one we're going to spend quite a bit of our time talking about here on this episode.
Yeah, the Odorizzi deal is really interesting. He has a 3.75 ERA and 12 starts. And if you're asking yourself, why would the AL West leading Astros trade a rotation piece for a bullpen arm that's really not having the most spectacular of seasons? Will Smith in over 12 ERA in his last 6 appearances. It's because Houston has a glutton of starters. They had 6 on the MLB roster. They have Lance McCullers Jr. on the way back. So they dealt from a position of strength. And the Braves took advantage, getting a guy in Odorizzi who has an option year for 2023. So a really interesting move. Obviously, there's going to be some feelings here for Braves country. Will Smith, again, was not having the best of years. He obviously was integral in the World Series run there. But this is a really intriguing move from the end that the Astros were in a position that the Braves could take advantage of.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a position where both teams just kind of lined up. And I don't know how many times that, well, here's a couple of things. When do the teams that meet in the World Series end up trading with one another the very next season? And how many times, and I can't imagine it's happened ever, is the pitcher who recorded the final out of the World Series traded by the team that beat the other club to the club that they beat? I really can't imagine that that's ever happened. But all of that aside, I'm focusing on the performance in 2022. For Will Smith, has been rocky over the last month, that's for sure. And his tenure in Atlanta has had some peaks and valleys. But if you were looking for the absolute peak of performance, 11 appearances in the postseason for the Braves in 2021. Every single Braves victory was closed out by Will Smith. And that shutout performance is one of the defining moments of that 2021 club. But the focus now for the Braves is trying to win it again in 2022. And I do think they needed a rotational piece, not necessarily the splashiest, biggest move, the Luis Castillos of the world, but somebody who could just give you some insurance for your rotation, because you might end up needing it over the next couple of months. And as we know, Alex Anthopoulos is trying to be proactive about moves of areas that might become a need at some point after the trade deadline when you're unable to add pieces. And if you did add a piece, they're ineligible for the postseason roster. So that, I think, kind of plays into all of this. There is a lot of rotational depth over there for the Astros, and Odorizzi was a piece that they don't necessarily need moving forward. But I think he's a nice complement for the Braves rotation and the Braves pitching staff as Alex Anthopoulos looks to make all of these moves to make his team that much better.
Yeah, and certainly the rise of Dylan Lee, Tyler Matzik being back in the fold gave the Braves the room to be able to make this deal. You mentioned Robbie Grossman. He comes over to the Tigers for minor leaguer Chris Anglin. With Adam Duvall's season-ending surgery, obviously there was a need for a corner outfield spot. I think this is eerily similar, though, to the Jorge Soler and Eddie Rosario deals from last year, because both those guys came in amid seasons in which they were hitting below league average, but they both had resumes in which they had hit above league average. And that's kind of the deal with Grossman right now. He's kind of coming off of seasons in which he had a 127 and 114 weighted run created plus. He had 23 homers last year. So we're going to be able to see if Anthopoulos and the Braves can pull it off of again with the guys you mentioned, who's hitting really well against lefties, destroying them at 189 weighted run created plus. So I think when you look at that compared to 28 versus righties, Grant, this could be that really nice compliment to Eddie Rosario as the platoon player.
Yeah, and as we've talked about here, as we talked about on From the Diamond, really you need Eddie Rosario to be Eddie Rosario again. And I think he's shown signs over the last couple of weeks of really starting to put some things together at the plate. And the Braves need that to be one of the contributing factors to that left field question mark that was really just opened up and became an open-ended question once Adam Duvall was injured and was lost for the season. But yeah, Robbie Grossman was a 2020 man last year for the Tigers. He did hit well above league average, as you mentioned, a 114 weighted runs created plus, and he didn't make an error for 3 years. If you're into that sort of thing, I love guys who make plays, and Robbie Grossman's one of those guys. He has made a couple of miscues this year, so his streak of 3, nearly 4 seasons of airless baseball came to an end. But just a nice complimentary piece, and the kind of moves that you make, as you mentioned, very similar to going out and getting some guys who are in a bit of a down season. Certainly the case for Grossman, only 2 home runs this year, batting around 200 for the Tigers. This has not been the year he's wanted for himself, but now you go from a club that's sitting around in the cellar of one division to a club that's fighting to get to the top of another division. So maybe that will ignite him, and that change of scenery thing, as we learned last year, that's a real thing in baseball and in sports, I believe.
Yeah, Grossman can play all 3 outfield spots, and you're getting versatility from him, but you're most certainly getting it from the return of Adrianza, who obviously was part of the Braves World Series run a year ago. They move on from 2019 minor league player of the year, Trey Harris. Adrianza is hitting either 179 average, a 458 OPS, but again, you're getting positional versatility from a guy who's been a positive defender in the past in terms of defensive runs saved at first, second, shortstop, the outfield. He even pitched an inning for the Nationals this year, Grant. I don't think that's going to happen.
Hopefully
but
not.
you mentioned moving on from Robinson Cano. This is a guy I think you obviously know. You saw him get over 700 OPS for the Braves last season. And if Ozzie Albies is out until September, I mean, this could go a long way if you pair him with Orlando Arcia to being able to fill that void.
Yeah, and we just found out that Robinson Cano really wasn't the answer to the question at second base, and trying to get some production in the interim of having Ozzie Albies on the IL and hopefully getting him back at some point, whether it's later this month or in September. And you know what you're adding to this club in Adrianza, and it's not because he's going to be the biggest offensive splash that the Braves make at the trade deadline or put the club over the top offensively, but I do think that versatility is important. He hasn't played a ton with the Nationals. I don't believe he had maybe right around 100 plate appearances for the year, not much more, if so. And that is not much of a sample size to speak of when you talk about a player that's either not having a good year or just performing perhaps below the norms of what they've set in previously in their career, or what we saw from Adrianza last year. So long story short, this isn't, again, the splashiest of moves, but as we talked about a couple of different times leading up to the trade deadline, I really expected there to be some quality and some quantity that was going to be added to the depth of this club, more so than expecting the Braves to be in the mix for everybody, whether it's Juan Soto or whether it's, Luis Castillo or some of the other arms and big name players that have moved or could move at some point.
Well, there's obviously been moves aplenty and the clock is ticking. We'll have you covered here on BPTV. So subscribe and turn on notifications, get those alerts each and every time that we drop a new episode. So buckle up, Braves country. Could be an interesting next few hours. We'll see you in soon.